Christmas dinner looked warm, but it felt like a funeral to me. I stood in the doorway with a fake smile and said, "Merry Christmas," even though my chest felt tight. Linda glanced at me and said, "You're late," like I was a guest, not family. Emily laughed and said, "Relax, it's Christmas." Rachel squeezed my hand once, then let go too fast. I sat down and tried to joke. "Smells good. Dad would have loved this." Linda's fork froze. She said, "Let's not bring him up tonight." Emily added, "Yeah, it ruins the mood." I swallowed and said, "Sorry?" Rachel stared at her plate and said nothing. Linda lifted her glass. "We should eat before it gets cold." I asked, "How's the house budget doing?" Emily smirked. "Why do you care?" I said, "Because I help pay for it." Linda replied, "We're handling things now." Rachel finally spoke. "Let's just have dinner, okay?" Halfway through, Emily leaned over and whispered, "You should have dressed better." I said, "What?" She smiled. "Nothing." Linda asked me, "Are you still at the warehouse?" I nodded. "Yeah. Overtime too." She said, "That's nice." The way she said it felt sharp. When it was time for gifts, Emily clapped. My favorite part. Linda handed boxes to everyone. Emily got a bracelet. Rachel got a coat. I waited. Linda looked at me and said, "Oh." Emily laughed. "Guess Santa forgot you." Rachel said softly, "Linda?" Linda waved her off. "We'll talk later." My face burned. I said, "Did I do something wrong?" Linda set her napkin down. "We need to clear the air." Emily crossed her arms, smiling. Rachel finally looked at me, then away. Linda said, "Your father made changes before he passed." I said, "Changes to what?" She answered, "The will. The house." I laughed once. "That's not funny." Linda said, "It's not a joke." Emily added, "Mom's just being honest." I asked, "Why am I hearing this now?" Linda replied, "Because it's time you knew." Rachel whispered, "I'm sorry." I turned to her. "For what?" She couldn't answer. Linda continued, "The house is being transferred." I said, "To who?" Emily said, "Us." My hands shook. "Dad wouldn't do that." Linda said, "He did. He wanted security." I said, "I was his son." Emily shrugged. "And we were here." I stood up. "You planned this." Linda said, "Sit down." I said, "No." Rachel finally spoke louder. "Please don't do this tonight." I asked her, "You knew?" She nodded, eyes wet. I thought it was for the best. That hurt more than Linda's words. I grabbed my coat. Linda said, "Don't be dramatic." Emily laughed. "Merry Christmas." I stepped outside into the cold air. My breath shook. I realized I hadn't lost a gift. I'd lost my place, and no one asked my permission. I stood on the porch and heard the door open behind me. Rachel said, "Wait." I turned and asked, "Why?" She said, "I didn't want to hurt you." I answered, "But you did." She stepped closer. "They said you'd be okay." I laughed. "When have I ever been okay with losing my home?" She whispered, "I was scared." I said, "So was I." Linda's voice came from inside. Rachel let him cool off. Emily added, "He always makes a scene." I shouted back, "I heard that." Emily replied, "Good." Rachel reached for me. I pulled away. "Don't touch me," she cried, "please." I said, "I trusted you." Snow started falling, light and quiet. Rachel said, "We can fix this." I asked, "How?" She had no answer. The door closed. I stood alone, staring at the dark street. I thought about my dad teaching me to shovel this driveway. I whispered, "I failed you." My phone buzzed with a holiday song. I turned it off. Christmas lights blinked behind me, but none of them felt like they were for me anymore. That night, I closed my bedroom door and said, "Rachel, tell me this is a mistake." She stood near the window and hugged her arms. "I can't," she said. I asked, "Why won't you even look at me?" She whispered, "Because I already chose." My heart dropped. I said, "Chose what?" She answered, "Security." I laughed once. "That's it." She said, "Linda promised stability." I asked, "At my expense?" She nodded. "I thought you'd understand." I said, "You helped them push me out." She replied, "I was scared of losing everything." I stepped closer. "You already lost me." She cried, "Don't say that." I said, "You said it first." I paced the room and said, "How long?" She answered, "Since your dad got sick." I froze. "You knew then?" She nodded. Emily said it was temporary. I said, temporary betrayal? She snapped, stop yelling. I whispered, I'm not yelling. I'm breaking. She tried to touch my arm. Please. I pulled away. Don't. She said, they said you'd bounce back. I asked, did you believe them? She hesitated. I wanted to. That hurt more than a yes. I said, get out. She begged, just listen. I said, I listened for months. She left quietly. I sat on the bed and replayed every smile, every late reply, every excuse. I said to myself, I missed it all. The walls felt closer. I heard Linda's voice downstairs, sharp and happy. I stepped into the hallway and listened. Linda laughed on the phone. It was easy, she said. He never questions me. My hands clenched. She continued, by New Year he'll be gone. Emily's voice joined in. He's weak. Linda replied, like his father at the end. I felt sick. Emily noticed me and smirked. Eavesdropping? I said, you planned this. She shrugged. You should have fought harder. I asked, is that what you think? She said, I know it. Linda hung up and said, don't start drama. I answered, you stole from me. She replied, we protected ourselves. I said, I trusted you. Linda laughed. That was your mistake. Emily added, men like you don't survive alone. I stared at them and felt something snap. I won't stay, I said. Linda waved her hand. Do what you want. Emily smiled. Good luck. I went upstairs and packed a bag. Rachel knocked. Please don't leave like this. I said, like what? She said, like I'm the enemy. I zipped the bag. You are. She cried, I loved you. I answered, you loved safety more. Before dawn I slipped out quietly. The house was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. I checked my pockets, phone, wallet. I reached for my wrist and felt my father's old watch. I whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. The door closed behind me. The house wasn't mine anymore. Neither was the life I thought I had built. Mark opened the door and said, you look like hell. I dropped my bag and said, can I crash here? He stepped aside. Couch is yours. I sat down and stared at the floor. He asked, what happened? I laughed weakly. Everything. He handed me water. Start talking. I said, they took the house. He frowned. Who? I answered, Linda, Emily, even Rachel. He said, slow down. I rubbed my face. I trusted them. Mark sat across from me. And? I said, they used it. My voice cracked. I feel stupid. He said, you're not. I said, Rachel chose security. Mark scoffed. That's not love. I nodded. I know that now. He asked, you eat? I shook my head. Not since yesterday. He grabbed his keys. We're going out. I said, I don't feel like it. He replied, you don't get to disappear. At the diner I pushed food around. Mark said, look at me. I did. He said, you're breathing. That means you're not done. I laughed. Feels like I am. He leaned in. Think, don't react. I asked, think about what? He said, what they missed. A voice behind me said, excuse me. I turned and froze. Mrs. Carter? She smiled softly. I thought that was you. I stood up. It's been a while. She said, I'm sorry about your father. I swallowed. Thank you. Mark said, you know her? I nodded. Dad's lawyer. Mrs. Carter Saturday, I heard about the will. I said, then you know I lost. She shook her head. I know something feels off. My heart jumped. What do you mean? She said, your father was careful. I whispered, he wouldn't cut me out. She replied, exactly. Mark leaned back. That sounds important. She said, call me tomorrow? I nodded. I will. She stood and said, don't give up yet. I watched her leave and felt something warm spark inside my chest. Mark smiled. See? I said, it's small. He answered, small is enough. Back on the couch the room was quiet. I stared at the ceiling and said out loud, I won't beg. Mark replied from the kitchen, good. I added, I won't explode either. He said, smarter choice. I touched my father's watch and whispered, I'll survive first. The anger stayed, calm and waiting, but I promised myself I wouldn't forget. Mrs. Carter closed her office door and said, sit down. I sat and said, just tell me the truth. She folded her hands. Your father updated his will. My chest tightened. When? She replied, for months before he passed. I said, then why wasn't it used? She said, because it disappeared. I leaned forward. You're saying it was stolen? She nodded. I believe it was manipulated. I whispered, by Linda? She didn't argue. Your father was sick, she said. He trusted her. I clenched my jaw. I should have been there more. She said, don't blame yourself. I said, I let this happen. She slid papers across the desk. These are drafts. I scanned them. My name is still here. She said, exactly. I laughed bitterly. They lied to my face. Mrs. Carter replied, that's why we need proof. I asked, can we get it? She answered, with patience. I met Mark outside and said, they stole it. He said, I knew it. I added, Emily moved money too. Mark raised his brows. How much? I showed him my phone. Enough to notice. He whistled. That's not random. I said, it's theft. He said, then we dig. We sat at his kitchen table. Mark said, read this. I said, that's an account transfer. He nodded. From your dad's funds. I whispered, to Emily. Mark said, multiple times. My hand shook. She drained him. Mark replied, slowly and quietly. I said, while he was sick. I closed my eyes. I should have checked. Mark said, you trusted family. I laughed. That was my weakness. He shook his head. It was your humanity. I looked at the numbers again. They planned this. Mark said, and they thought you'd stay silent. I replied, they were wrong. That night I called Mrs. Carter. We found transfers. She paused. That helps. I asked, is it enough? She said, it's a start. I breathed out. I'm scared. She said, that means you care. I answered, I'm also angry. She replied, use that wisely. Mark poured coffee. You okay? I said, I'm changing. He smiled. I can see it. I said, I'm done feeling small. He nodded. Good. I stared at the documents. They took my home. Mark said, take it back. I whispered, I will. Mrs. Carter emailed a file. I opened it and froze. This is it. Mark asked, what? I said, a copy of the updated will. He leaned in. Is it real? I said, if we prove it. The paper felt heavy in my hands. For the first time, I wasn't begging or grieving. I was ready. I knocked on the front door and said, I just want to talk. Linda opened it with a careful smile. Of course, she said. We were worried about you. I stepped inside and replied, I needed time. Emily sat on the couch and smirked. Looks like he survived. I ignored her and said, I'm moving on. Linda touched my arm. That's healthy. I nodded. I thought so too. Rachel stood near the stairs, eyes down. I said, hey. She answered softly, hi. The silence stretched. Emily laughed. This is awkward. I smiled. It doesn't have to be. We sat at the table. Linda said, we've had some stress lately. I asked, money stress? She stiffened. Why would you ask that? I shrugged. Just guessing. Emily rolled her eyes. You always guess wrong. I clicked my phone on, hidden in my pocket. Linda said, creditors are annoying. I leaned back. Sounds serious. She waved her hand. Temporary. Emily snapped, my deal will fix it. I asked, what deal? She hesitated. None of your business. I smiled. Just curious. Rachel finally spoke. Do you want tea? I said, sure. She poured with shaking hands. Emily muttered, he thinks he's clever. I replied, I think everyone's nervous. Linda forced a laugh. You imagine things. I said, maybe. Emily's phone rang. She answered and snapped, not now. Her face went pale. Linda whispered, what happened? Emily hissed, the investor backed out. Linda's smile vanished. What? Emily said, I said it's fine. I sipped my tea. Doesn't sound fine. Linda stood. We don't need commentary. I replied calmly, I'm just listening. She said, you always judge. I answered, I learned from you. Emily glared. Why are you here? I smiled wider. Closure. Rachel whispered, please don't fight. I looked at her. I'm not. Emily laughed harshly. You enjoy this. I said, I enjoy truth. Linda crossed her arms. You think you're better now? I replied, I think I'm patient. Linda's phone buzzed. She read the message and cursed quietly. I asked, bad news? She snapped, enough. Emily said, Mom, calm down. Linda whispered, we're in trouble. I pretended not to hear and stood up. I should go. Rachel looked relieved. Okay. Linda forced a smile again. Come by any time. I nodded. I will. Emily scoffed. Don't bother. I walked to the door and turned. Take care of the house. Linda flinched. Outside I breathed slowly. My phone buzzed with saved audio. Mark texted, did you get it? I replied, everything. I looked back at the house and smiled. They thought I came back weak. They didn't know I was counting every crack forming. I walked away calm, holding proof while the storm gathered behind me. Mrs. Carter slid the envelope across the desk and said, this starts it. I asked, once it's filed there's no turning back? She nodded. They'll be notified. I signed and said, send it. She replied, you're sure? I answered, I've never been more sure. When I walked out my hands were steady. 3 days later Linda called screaming. What did you do? I said, I told the truth. She yelled, you're trying to ruin us. I replied, you did that yourselves. She shouted, withdraw it. I said, no. She hung up hard. I felt nothing. Emily texted nonstop. We need to talk. This is a mistake. Mom is freaking out. I ignored them. Rachel called next. I almost didn't answer. I said, what? She whispered, they're scared. I replied, so am I. She said, Emily asked me to help. I asked, and? She paused. I won't. We met outside a cafe. Rachel said, I backed the wrong side. I answered, you chose it. She said, I didn't know it would go this far. I laughed quietly. You knew enough. She cried, I'm sorry. I said, that doesn't fix betrayal. She reached for my hand. I miss you. I pulled back. You miss safety. She said, I see you differently now. I replied, I see myself differently too. She asked, can we start over? I shook my head. You left when I was drowning. She whispered, I regret it. I said, live with that. She nodded, defeated, and walked away. Mark called. Court letters arrived. I said, how bad? He laughed. Linda's accounts are frozen. I closed my eyes. Emily? He replied, investors ran. I exhaled. Good. He said, you sound calm. I answered, I'm focused. Linda showed up at Mark's place, eyes wild. You turned everyone against us, she said. I replied, I told the truth. She shouted, you're heartless. I said, you taught me. She cried, we're family. I answered, family doesn't steal. She left shaking. Emily posted online, angry and careless. Comments piled up. Sponsors disappeared. She messaged me, fix this. I replied, you broke it. She wrote, I'm begging. I stared at the screen and typed nothing. Power felt heavy in my chest. At night, I sat alone and said out loud, this doesn't feel good. Mark replied from the kitchen, it's not supposed to. I said, I thought winning would feel cleaner. He answered, justice isn't pretty. I touched my father's watch and whispered, I hope I'm doing right. Mrs. Carter called. We're moving forward. I said, whatever it takes. She replied, this may get ugly. I answered, it already did. After the call, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized myself. I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. Linda lost access to funds. Emily lost her image. Rachel lost her chance. I felt the shift happen quietly. Control wasn't loud. It was steady. I knew I could stop, but I didn't. I chose to keep going even with doubt in my chest because walking away now would mean forgiving lies that nearly erased me. The knock at my door startled me. I opened it slowly. Linda stood there, tears streaming. I need to talk, she said. I crossed my arms. Now. She whispered, please? I'm scared. I leaned against the frame. Scared of what? She sniffled. Losing everything. Losing you. I said, you already lost me. She stepped inside. I wasn't thinking. I asked, when were you thinking? She sat, head in hands. I panicked. I said quietly, funny? That's what I felt on Christmas. She looked up, pleading. I was lonely. I made mistakes. I replied, You made choices. Minutes passed. The silence was heavy. She said, I can fix this. I'll pay back. I cut her off. You're not asking to fix anything. You're asking forgiveness. She nodded. Yes. I said, not from me. Not anymore. The doorbell rang again. Emily barged in, angry. What are you doing here? I said, listening. She snapped, you ruined us. I replied, you did that yourselves. Linda looked away, ashamed. Emily glared at me. I'm begging, okay? Just, forgive us. I leaned forward. You don't mean it. She yelled, I do. Mom's desperate. I said, desperation isn't sincerity. Linda whispered, I never wanted it to end like this. I said, you never cared when it started. Emily's fists clenched. You think you're better? I smiled faintly. I'm stronger. Smarter. Not kinder. She spat. Then what do you want? I said, nothing from you. Nothing at all. Linda's voice cracked. I just wanted you safe. I shook my head. Safe? You called me weak, excluded me, took my home. She looked away. I was scared of being alone. I said, I understand fear. I don't understand betrayal. Emily stomped. You can't just walk away. I replied calmly, I already did. Emotionally, legally, completely. Linda gasped. Please, just one chance? I said, I won't destroy you. That's enough. Karma is knocking. I'm done helping. Emily cried. You don't mean that. I said, I do. They stayed silent for a moment, realizing I wouldn't sway. I touched my father's old watch. Remember Christmas night? That memory stays with me. Linda whispered, I regret it. I said, regret doesn't undo choices. Emily muttered, we're sorry? I replied, I hear you. That's all. Linda wiped her tears. Will you ever forgive me? I said, not now. Not fully. You'll have to live with it. Emily said, we just want. I cut her off. I won't save you. Don't ask. Don't expect. Their shoulders slumped. After a long pause, they both turned toward the door. Emily muttered, this is over. Linda added, we'll figure it out ourselves. I nodded once. Goodbye. They left, closing the door softly. I stood alone, listening to the lock click, feeling the weight of their absence. I exhaled slowly. Midnight had never sounded so quiet. The court letter sat on the table. I opened it slowly. It's official, I whispered. Mark grinned beside me. You did it. I nodded. All of it, house, money, everything. He clapped me on the back. Quiet victory, I said. Exactly. I stepped into the living room. The walls felt familiar again. I touched my father's old watch. I almost forgot who I was, I muttered. Mark leaned against the doorway. You've changed. I said, I've survived. He smiled. More than that. You took control. My phone buzzed. Rachel. I hesitated, then opened the message. I'm sorry. I wish things were different. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I deleted it. Not needed, I said. Mark nodded silently. Closure, he said. Yes, I replied. Finally. I walked to the window and looked outside. Fireworks lit the sky. Funny, I said. I expected anger. Instead, there's calm. Mark joined me. That's your reward. I whispered, revenge wasn't about hurting them. He raised an eyebrow. Then what? I answered, proving I wasn't powerless. We sipped coffee in quiet companionship. Feels strange, I said. Winning and feeling peace at the same time. Mark chuckled. That's life. I said, no one can take this from me now. He nodded. Good. I checked the house again. Everything was mine legally, morally, finally. I said, it's clean. All the lies, all the betrayals, they're gone. Mark said, you're ready for a new start. I looked at him and smiled. I'm not angry anymore. I'm alive. Outside, fireworks exploded. I felt the boom shake the walls. I whispered, Happy New Year. Mark said, to new beginnings. I exhaled and watched colors spill across the sky. No regrets, I said. Just lessons. He nodded. And strength. I said, exactly that. I leaned against the railing, feeling wind on my face. The house, the money, none of it matters without my peace. Mark said softly, you've got that. I smiled wider. Yes, and I'll keep it. The lights reflected off my father's watch. I touched it and whispered, I'm okay now. For the first time, the night wasn't about loss, betrayal, or anger. It was about survival, victory, and quiet triumph. "This is mine," I said, staring at the fireworks. "All of it." Mark stayed silent, letting me have the moment. I closed my eyes. Fireworks, cold air, and peace. A new year, a new me, and finally the ground beneath my feet felt solid. I stood in the hallway, staring at the front door I had finally locked behind me. "Everything is quiet," I whispered. Mark leaned against the wall. "You're thinking too much," he said. I shook my head. "No. I need to remember." He shrugged. "Suit yourself." I walked through the living room. "This place feels different," I said. "The furniture, the walls, even the air, it all belonged to me again." I touched the table. "I lost so much here." Mark asked, "And gained?" I smiled faintly. "Myself. I finally know who I am." I ran my hands over the shelves. "Trust isn't given freely anymore." Mark said, "Good lesson." I said, "Boundaries matter. Strength matters." He nodded. "You've learned both the hard way." I laughed quietly. "Yes. And I'll never forget." I sat by the window and stared at the street. "Christmas feels like a lifetime ago," I said. Mark leaned on the sill. "You're not that man anymore." I replied, "No, I'm not. I've changed. Smarter, calmer, alive." He said nothing, just let me have the moment. The house was mine, legally and emotionally. I whispered, "I took back more than money or property." I looked at my reflection in the glass. "I took back myself." Mark said softly, "That's worth more than anything." I nodded. "It is. Finally." I moved to the front door and checked the locks again. "Safety," I muttered. "Not just walls, but peace." Mark smiled. "Step forward then." I opened the door, feeling cold wind hit my face. "Here I go," I said. The new year stretched ahead, bright and uncertain. I walked slowly, deliberately, without looking back. The street was silent, and my breath formed clouds in the night. I whispered, "I'm stronger than I knew." Mark said quietly, "And ready." I nodded. "Yes, ready for everything life throws at me." Every step away from the house felt lighter. Every memory heavier, but contained. I paused at the end of the driveway and touched my father's old watch. "I'm okay now," I whispered. The words felt true. The past wasn't erased, but it no longer held power over me. I inhaled deeply, feeling the air fill my lungs. Mark stayed behind, silent and supportive. I walked down the street, past lights and snow, carrying lessons, scars, and quiet pride. "I'm myself again," I murmured. "Nothing can take that." Every step forward was mine alone. The story didn't need an ending, it was ongoing. I had reclaimed my life, my strength, and my peace. The watch on my wrist caught the moonlight. I whispered one last time, "I'm okay now." And I truly was.